Simpletons. Idiots lost in their dogma. I do not know what is worse, that they have let their fear of the unknown drive them to repeat the same tired designs ad infinitum, or that they have hoisted that fear on others and lauded it as an absolute truth. The universe is a rich buffet of knowledge, and yet most of our species seems content to starve to death. Cybernetics. I want them, you want them, but what are the dangers of them? Infection as you go through so many surgeries? Very real danger. Danger to others when you have an industrial lathe instead of a left arm? You would need to be careful shaking hands. Psychological turmoil as you lose your senses of touch, taste, and smell? Well, that would drive any of us to the edge. These are very real hazards to would-be cyborgs like you and me, but not for the already cyborg Belisarius Cawl. Let's see what we can learn from the old man. Belisarius Cawl, or Belisarius Cawl, if you will, is the giant mechanical centipede which was once a man currently employed part-time by the Adeptus Mechanicus. Now, massive invasive cybernetics are nothing new at the Mechanicus. As a matter of fact, they're not even old. Traditionally, the further you can pervert the God Emperor's glorious design with bionics, the higher you'll rise. And if you can be excessively rude to the point you're actively insulting the people trying to help you, so much the better. And Cawl is no slouch when it comes to disregarding the feelings of others, although most often the others he's disregarding are the other members of the Adeptus Mechanicus, a hobby he's maintained for 10,000 years. When we look back to the simple family farm days of Cawl's origin story, we will see that there was no farm, there was no family, and it was not so simple as he was born during the early days of the Horus Heresy. And even to say he was born is a bit of a stretch, because the Mechanicus don't do anything the old-fashioned way. No sir, no intercourse allowed in the universe of Warhammer 40k. Instead we have jars, we have goo, you put the two and two together and you get people. And I do mean people, not babies, as at the time Cawl was released from his bat tube on Mars, he was already physically 10 years old. However, in an intergalactic community, just because you're born on one planet does not give you the right to work there. So, Cawl popped out and was immediately handed transfer orders to head for a system known as Trisolan, where he was stationed at the very creatively named Trisolan A4, becoming the apprentice of Archmagos Domina Hester Aspertia Sigma Sigma. Now, Miss Sigma Sigma was involved in some very special work. She wasn't just working on how to make a better toaster. She, if in fact she was still a she at this point, was a master in an art known as soul killer. Soul merging, which is literally the same thing. You take a person's mind, digitize it so it fits on a USB, then upload it into either a living being or a mindless husk via cybernetic implants. And mindless husks they had, as Miss Sigma Sigma had pursued a dual doctorate in cloning technology. Young Cawl would jump into this research with both hemispheres. Quite literally. Back then, Cawl wasn't too big into external cybernetics, extra arms, robot eyes, various bionics, keywords being back then. But he did love the internal augments, beefing up his mind, performing numerous procedures which were unorthodox or flat out illegal on his own brain. How exactly he performed brain surgery on himself is a question for another time. However, even a single-minded cyborg inventor needs a personal life, and here we introduced fellow tech priest Friedisch Adam Ship Quovo. Something like that. When Belisarius and Friedisch first met, they did not like each other. Back when Belisarius needed a physician instead of an electrician, he still believed in the glory of the Omnissiah, and the Emperor was the Omnissiah. However, even all the way back then, he wanted to take the Mechanicus' policies against invention and innovation, and pin them to a wall so everyone could watch as he concentrated on ignoring them. Which annoyed Friedisch as a Mechanicus hardliner. Not Black Templar levels of dogmatic, my mind is a fortress from which I can kill everyone who doesn't 100% agree with me. But the tech priest didn't enjoy coloring outside the lines, which led to tensions between the two. Normally, this would be no problem. Cawl does, and will as long as he lives, make enemies in the Mechanicus the way the rest of us make meaningless posts on our social media of choice. No problem as long as they kept to their separate sandboxes. Except this was impossible since they were working for the same person. Which left them with two options, death or friendship. And being in the grim darkness of the future, really only one option. But Cawl is not one to be constrained even by the expectations of his own setting, as he and Friedisch became good friends. For all of Cawl's maverick tendencies, he possessed a genuine passion for his work. He didn't violate Mechanicus principles because it was fun. It was, but not only because of that. Cawl lived for the struggle of invention, the satisfaction that came in beating a problem, and even in his numerous failures, never let anything stop him. The Cyberman had an almost childlike fearlessness to get knocked off the monkey bars, then immediately start climbing on them again. An arrogance that initially turned Friedisch against Cawl, but he would come to find reassuring in trying times. And Fred would help Bel just the same. You see, sometimes rules are there to keep you from hurting others, or more to the point, yourself. And Fred, I'm just going to call him Fred now, would act as this voice of reason to make sure Cawl didn't loose cannon himself into an early grave. Best example of this would be when the pair were given custodianship over a piece of at the time unknown Xenos tech, but us mighty spacemen of the past will know as a Necron scarab. Cawl wanted to open the box it was in to do experiments on it, Fred talked him out of it, and was proven very correct when the scarab turned out to be not nearly as inactive as previously believed. So Cawl was taught the value of temperance, so he could stay alive long enough to really start breaking the rules. Speaking of breaking the rules, the Horus Heresy is still going on, though no one on Trylasan is all that interested. Wars are always going on, and no one cares about war until it comes to their doorstep. So the traitor fleet arrived in Trylasan, where Horus and his people started a recruitment drive. Yes, joining the Heresy was completely optional. You had the choice of either joining Horus and company, or dying. That's a full 2 options. In the interest of going along to get along, Cawl's boss, Miss Sigma Sigma, says, "Sure, I'll praise the dark gods as long as I can continue my work on mind cloning and physical cloning," to which the traitors were willing to accommodate. Unfortunately, this meant that Fred and Cawl were dragged into the heresy on the side of Horus. This was especially troubling when Cawl was able to lay eyes on Horus, having to fight the urge to recoil seeing how the ruinous powers had altered him. "Oh, Omnissiah, that is foul. That is the worst. Man, you look fantastic. You're a trendsetter. Everyone's gonna want to have pale skin and black pus leaking out of their eyes. You're fierce. I would incinerate myself if I ever looked like that." So Belisarius and Fred planned to run for the hills at their first opportunity. And there's no time like the present. The first step of their escape was to murder their mistress, Miss Sigma Sigma, keep her knowledge out of enemy hands, and pay her back for betraying the Imperium. So they garrote her real quick, but not before Cawl used the same soul-merging tech he learned from Sigma Sigma to absorb her mind into his own. Very easy thanks to all those illegal cerebellum implants he had installed. So now Cawl had all the expert knowledge safely stored in his own unethically enhanced mind as the two of them stole a ship and beelined for Terra. Arriving at the homeworld, the pair were immediately arrested as suspected traitors. They were flying a traitor ship, coming from a traitor fleet. It wasn't a huge leap in logic. However, neither Fred nor Cawl showed any signs of corruption, not that it would have mattered so much, and the pair were saved from the Imperium's black bags by a very influential man named Ezekiel Sedayne. How influential? Well, Mr. Sedayne was on a first-name basis with the Emperor. He managed to reach that level of esteem because he was one of the geneticists who worked on the Space Marines. He was actually the guy who perfected the Black Carapace, one of the unique organs of the Space Marines. It's basically a powerful new nervous system. Actually, if you ever see a Space Marine out of armor and his body has a bunch of matrix plugs, that's what the plugs feed into, allowing him to control power armor and vehicles. The more you know. However, our new friend Mr. Sedayne had fallen from grace a bit since those heady days just after the Unification Wars. You see, the Imperium could prolong the life of anyone, even basic humans, as long as they were valuable enough, which Sedayne was, although after so many centuries of doing this to his body, he had grown immune to the treatment. He was gonna die, but he saw a way out. If he could somehow transfer his consciousness into another body, he'd be set. And lo, here's this young-ish tech priest who knows all about that stuff. So Sedayne forms a plan to put his mind and personality into Belisarius Cawl's body. He starts off with the soft cell, trying to convince Cawl over time to give up his body. Then the Battle of Terra happens and Sedayne has to take the hard cell. He calls in Cawl and Fred to the little bedroom where he's dying and says, "Alright, Belisarius, I need your body, hand it over." Cawl's like, "Yeah, I'm into some reckless stuff, but I need my body to do that reckless stuff, so no?" Sedayne nods, okay, then has his assistant shoot Fred in the gut. Now, I can save him because I'm a super talented geneticist, but I need the body first so I don't die. And Cawl says something to the effect of, "Fuck you, but I guess I have no choice." So they begin the process of digitizing Sane's consciousness and putting it into Cawl's body. Except, and I swear to the God Emperor this is true, Cawl's ego was so damn massive that it ended up absorbing Sedayne's mind instead, giving Cawl all of Sedayne's knowledge and a second little voice in his head to match Miss Sigma Sigma. Basically, Sedayne tried to stage a home invasion on Cawl's mind palace, but was so overcome by the sheer size that he ended up becoming a butler instead. That is an Uno reverse card. Afterwards, Cawl gets up from the operating table, a very literal changed man. However, in the time it took to perform the operation, Fred had succumbed to his wounds. Now, with the knowledge he had, Cawl could, and indeed would, clone Fred, but he wouldn't need to do that in the first place if these idiots hadn't shot him. And at the sight of his best friend dying, Cawl feels some emotions. None of them positive. So he takes the assistant that had shot Fred and subjects them to a hell only a man capable of digitizing and manipulating consciousnesses can achieve. However, this would just be a personal activity, as Belisarius had greater callings ahead of him. Let's go back 10 or 20 seconds to when Cawl was absorbing Sedayne's mind, as a byproduct getting all of Sedayne's memories. One in particular where Sedayne was walking with the Emperor, and the Emperor referred to Sedayne as Cawl. Way before Cawl was a thing, the Big E was calling him out by name in another person's body. You don't get any more validation than that, and it meant that Cawl's ego had now hit critical mass. He was ready to start making waves, and his only connection left to the Mechanicus was as a cyborg who wore red. He still worked with Skitarii and servitors and people who were under him, but there was no hope he would ever listen to anyone else ever again. Except for the freshly cloned Fred. After the Siege of Heresy and the Battle of Horus were over, a now well-established Cawl was approached by another figure of some importance. The Primarch Rebuff Gallipoli. Gilliman had some orders for the evolving cyborg. Hey, I need to go off and get stabbed. In the meantime, would you work on a secret project for me involving the Astartes, which won't become relevant until Games Workshop needs to release a new product line? And Cawl, being all for secret projects, new things, and violating the rules in and out of universe, gave the thumbs up. Then, as soon as no one was looking, Cawl loaded up a bunch of Mechanicus loyalists onto a ship and took off into the stars, working on that secret project for Rabute, absorbing yet more consciousnesses into his head, which must have started to look like a halfway house for Doc Brown archetypes, and gradually evolving into the giant metal spaghetti monster which would become his trademark look. For 10,000 years he'd go on working with the Imperium, but not for the Imperium. Basically, Cawl was doing whatever he wanted, until an Eldari Shadowseer would step in to, very literally, get him back in the game. From the mystical Eldari influence, Cawl got the idea to start an archaeological dig on some nothing world in the middle of nowhere. The planet's only claim to any sort of identity was holding a tiny Imperial Navy depot which got leveled during one of Abaddon's failed crusades. But the ever single-minded Cawl was literally possessed with an urge to excavate it, and neither rain nor sleet nor an actual orc invasion at one point would stop him short. They dug beneath the surface and found artifacts. Artifacts of destroyed Necron pillars. And that was when Cawl put 2 and 2 together with the last piece of the puzzle as he got to the bottom of a mystery he didn't even know he was solving. It turned out that Abaddon, Horus 2.0, now with Kung Fu Grip, wasn't a failure who needed 13 attempts to take over one planet. Every one of his failed crusades in the past had been a ploy to destroy pylons like these. And once he started digging, metaphorically this time, Cawl found that there was only one planet around the Eye of Terror which still had these pylons. And that planet's name was Cadia. So Cawl hopped in behind the wheel of his spaceship and took off with all speed towards Cadia. He arrived after the 13th Black Crusade had already begun and shit was getting demonic. However, all was not lost as Cawl provided much needed reinforcement with the Skitarii and servitors under his command, which may or may not have served as a convenient distraction so he could go inside the planet and start tinkering with the pylons. Unfortunately, Cawl was still Mechanicus at heart. Not that this kept him from tinkering with Xenos tech, it meant that he fell victim to the time-honored 40k tradition. Every time the Mechanicus and the Necrons are in the same room together, the Mechanicus have to look like doofs. The Mechanicus can only provide the feed line, while the actual robot people get the punchline. Always the straight man, never the comedian. So Cawl wasn't making any progress, until a friendly hooded Necron with a penchant for taking things he likes, up to and including other people's bodies, stepped in. So the dream team of 2 old men who will never listen to authority got the pylons online. Now, as everyone who's played Space Marine 2 at this point will know, these pylons turn off chaos. They're called null pylons, and what they do is basically broadcast a massive counter frequency for all warp entities. Now, this kind of hurt entities like Saint Celestine and the Legion of the Damned who draw power from the warp, but the Imperium had more than just those friendly demons on its side, pushing back against chaos. Abaddon's forces were routed. Until they weren't, as Abaddon moved on to Plan B, also known as Plan Hail Mary, Plan Going for Broke, Plan James Vega, or Plan I'm going to crash my flagship into the planet and just see what happens. And in this case what happened was that when the Blackstone Fortress crashed into Cadia, the pylons were destroyed and the entire planet started to split apart. So Cawl and friends piled into his ship and got the hell out of there as hell started spreading from there. The revitalized traders gave chase until the Mechanicus mystery machine escaped into a webway portal, and the Ynnari brand Eldar who opened the portal for them said, "It's time to revive Guilliman," which Cawl was all about. So they got together and revived Guilliman, and Cawl helped. Actually, he was quite instrumental in the revival process, but I gloss over this for the same reason I gloss over every big story in one of these, because it's too big and would distract from the character's story. Not that there's much that can distract anyone from Cawl, or Cawl from anything he wants, as he was the first one in line to talk to the freshly revived Rabute. "Hey boss, I finished up your super secret project," which is how we ended up with Primaris Space Marines, which are like Space Marines, but more. See? More. They're taller now. And since I did such a good job with that, plus I'm bringing in all this other tech I was working on for 10,000 years, how about you do me a favor as Lord Commander of the Imperium and name me Fabricator General of Mars? Which would basically make Cawl the president of the largest forge world in the Imperium, by extension making him the head honcho of the Mechanicus. And Girly Man said, "Maybe, you know what, I just got back, I gotta get the lay of the land first, I'll talk with the committee but I'll think about it, don't you worry, I'll think about it." Because he has no intention of naming Cawl to the Fabricator General of Mars. For one, Cawl's penchant for violating the Mechanicus rules against invention and getting away with it has made him an extremely polarizing figure, and naming him to the boss's position would be all but guaranteeing a civil war among the Mechanicus. For two, Guilliman doesn't trust Cawl either. The guy knows no limits, and if it wasn't for Fred, who's still around by the way, last tally he's up to clone number 88, Cawl wouldn't know any boundaries either. The guy experiments with human tech, chaos, Xenos, and even AI, which leads to Cawl Inferior. You see, in 40k, no one uses AI for anything ever. People are more inclined to risk messing around with demons than experimenting with AI, and that's not a joke. Long before the heresy, before the Great Crusade, even before the Emperor exposed himself to the galaxy, humanity went through a tiff with AI. The standard science fiction tiff with AI in the vein of Skynet, AM, or The Reapers. Not a good time to be alive, and created a cultural scar so deep that some tens of thousands of years later, again, people are more willing to investigate Satan's technology rather than risk making a new Satan themselves. And Cawl also isn't experimenting with AI. Nope, not him. Instead, he's made Cawl Inferior, which isn't an AI. Cawl Inferior is a digital copy of the real man's consciousness, plus the 90 or so minds that have been joined alongside it. Which may sound like the Geth from Mass Effect, but isn't, because it isn't an AI. It's just a gift to Guilliman, which Cawl had installed on the Primarch's ship, so he could talk with a version of Cawl at all times. And that may seem like a problem to have an AI on board your ship, but of course this isn't an AI, despite what Rabute may suspect. Also, the Cawl Inferior installed aboard Guilliman's ship as a glorified answering machine may not be the only one Belisarius has created. He's cloned Fred almost 100 times, and put so many personalities inside his head that his internal dialogue now resembles the lecture hall at the most stuck-up research university in existence, who's to say he hasn't duplicated himself in half a dozen not AIs? Which could be a potential answer to how he's lived so long. For reference, no other tech priest has ever made it past 1,000 years old, either becoming so knowledgeable they turn into analytical paranoid husks, moving so far away from humanity they're basically Xenos and must be executed as such, or one of the untold number of ways the human mind can break after being left to run for a millennia, yet Cawl's been going strong for 10 of those. The possible explanation could be that he backs up his hard drive in the most literal way possible, and every time he starts to feel himself lose it, he wipes his mind and goes back to a clean save. It wouldn't be the first time he's completely violated Mechanicus principles for his own gain, and you can be guaranteed it won't be the last. Because that is Belisarius Cawl, ladies and gentlemen. The following is not a fan animation, but a legitimate animation from Games Workshop's own marketing material, and as such should be treated as canon.
Lord Cawl, you can't just solve all of our problems by making more Primaris Space Marines!
The hell I can't!
I mean, that just says more about Cawl than I could accomplish in an hour. And as we wrap up this video and the credits appear, let me take a moment to share some of Cawl's new inventions which were in no way inspired by the technology of other races. Because what are they or the Inquisition gonna do, huh? Did the Emperor say their name in another person's memory? Didn't think so. The Space Marine Eradicators seem to bear a striking resemblance to the Eldar's Fire Dragons, both being anti-vehicle infantry who use superheated guns to melt through armor. But you know, the Marines wear heavy armor, so they couldn't be more different. The Gladiator Lancer and the Tau's Hammerhead share similar looks, with that big old cannon on the back and elevated on the vehicle. Then there are two rapid-fire anti-infantry weapons on the front. No, one's a laser, the other's a railgun. Couldn't possibly be the same. The Impulsor has the open back and quick movement which is so popular on the Viper from the Drukhari's line. They both even have an option for a heavy weapon on the top mount. Of course I'm being silly. The Impulsor is only flimsy relative to the other vehicles in the Space Marine lineup. The Reavers using loudspeaker technology to try and break enemy will might at a glance seem very close to the sonic weaponry used by the Noise Marines from Chaos. And at more than a glance. A ridiculous notion on my part. No tech priest would ever consort with technology from the warp. And then there's Gravis armor with its distinctive high hunch back, not unlike the high back on the Leagues of Votan's numerous armors. Also, these two are the only two to use Volkite weaponry, so maybe Cawl had some deals with the Space Dwarves during his time among the Void. However, as we all know, the Votan launched after all this stuff was already available to the Astartes, so it's clear that it's the dwarves who are ripping off the Imperium. Belisarius Cawl, proving that originality is overrated so long as you can steal someone else's ideas and do them better.